So, in studying the passage in Loomings in Moby Dick, where Ishmael says of the myth of Narcissus that it shows the ungraspable phantom of life, and this is the key to it all. In studying that, we talked about how that particular moment in Greek mythology, at least as Melville reconfigures it, shows a certain kind of doubling. Narcissus looks at his image in the water. The image is a double of himself. He is so enamored of himself that he tries to embrace himself in the water and drowns. And we talked about this as an early image for the kind of monomania that Ahab himself will manifest throughout the novel. Like Narcissus, Ahab is enamored of his ego to the point where he ultimately wants to reduce the entire world around him to Ahab. Wherever he looks, he sees his pain. Wherever he looks, he sees his quest. Events in the world are only interesting to him insofar as they either help him on his quest or do not help him on his quest, insofar as they intensify his pain or ease his pain. In other words, the world is only meaningful to him insofar as it relates to his specific concerns. And we see this exemplified in the famous doubloon chapter, doubloon, as I've noted, being a pun for doubling, where Ahab looks at the golden doubloon nailed to the masthead, the doubloon that we rewarded to the sailor who first sees Moby Dick. And all the parts of this coin are, as he looks at it, Ahab. The sun is Ahab, the mountain is Ahab, so on and so forth. So that's one kind of doubling, an effort to reduce the world, the otherness of the world, to the same. And of course, that self love in Ahab's case leads to his death, just as the self love in Narcissus's case leads to his death. Now, there's another kind of doubling in the novel, and this kind of doubling is more associated with Ishmael. And this is doubling not as replication of self, but doubling as division of self. We see very early on in the novel Ishmael being Ishmael, but also at the same time attempting to be Queequeg. He's so enamored of Queequeg. He talks about how his stiff prejudices, his Presbyterian prejudices, bend in his love for Queequeg. And on more than one occasion, he uses imagery suggesting that he and Queequeg are one. They gather together. He merges with Queequeg. So Ishmael becomes Ishmael and Queequeg at the same time, civilized and, according to the standards of the 19th century, non-civilized at the same time. Now, this carries on throughout the novel. We could say when Ishmael disappears, basically, his ego dissolves, and we hear stories that there is no way that Ishmael could have heard. We see scenes that there's no way Ishmael could have seen. It's as if he has become all the characters of the Pequod. So we could say that in some ways he is Ishmael, but also these other characters. Now, there are various points in the novel where Ishmael seems to celebrate division of self as an opportunity for reconciling oppositions. Now, this is in contradistinction to Ahab, who ultimately wants to reduce the many to the one, whereas Ishmael seems to want to distribute his one into the many. So there's a moment at the end of the Try Works chapter where he talks about how he was at the tiller one night watching all the crew members burn the whale blubber down to oil. And he stared at the fires and the sailors caked in black, oily soot. And he fell into a kind of reverie. And in doing so, he got turned around. He was at the tiller, got turned around at the tiller, and he almost capsized the entire ship. And he says, don't look too long into the face of fire. Basically, he says, you can go deep into melancholy. You can go deep into the valley of melancholia, into darkness and into doubt and despair. But if you go too deeply there, you can end up dying. You have to go down into the valley deeply, like the Catskill eagle, he says, but then fly out again. So even though you're going into the valley, you're also very high up at the same time. So this idea that ideally one should reconcile melancholia and joy, height and depth. In the fountain, he says that noble beings like the sperm whale enter into the mists of doubt, just as the sperm whale enters into the mists of his spout of the spout coming out of his the water coming out of his spout. And if you stay deeply enough into the mist, into the vapor, then the sun might shine through and the rainbow might appear. You can only experience the rainbow if you are in the midst of doubt. And he says you should try to find this equality between doubt and faith in your life. You should be neither orthodox nor infidel, but somehow both at the same time. Um, in another chapter, he talks about the Pequod having a right whale's head attached to one side and a sperm whale's head attached to the other side. And one is Locke and one is Kant. Locke standing for empiricism, Kant standing for idealism. Locke saying we only gain knowledge by data coming into the mind. Kant saying that the mind has categories already within it that shapes the data coming in from outside. So there are all these moments where Ishmael says, look, there are many duplicities in the world. There are many polarities in the world, oppositions, and wisdom is the ability to bring them together, to reconcile them. But he also says that the sperm whale has an eye on either side of its head and has therefore double vision, which would seem to be admirable because the whale can see two peripheries at the same time. But in being so consumed by the oppositions, the whale has no eye in front, therefore does not have a unified field of vision. So it could swim right into something. It could not see right in front of its face. So I think that Melville is suggesting that even though Ishmael's vision seems generous and open and flexible, and it is compared to Ahab's, there are limitations to it. There's a kind of blindness to the world that can come with being too open, too generously skeptical. And we see this in the masthead where Ishmael imagines a character much like himself being so meditative up on top of the masthead that he could possibly fall to his death. He blinds himself, in other words, to concrete realities. So what do we have here? We have in Moby-Dick, we have on the one hand Ahab, his monomania, which is destructive. We see that. But also there's a sense that that sort of focused vision might be necessary for carrying out valuable and noble tasks in the world. A necessary blindness to the periphery can lead to the writing of a novel like Moby-Dick. There's something Ahabian about Melville pushing this novel through to the end. On the other hand, you see with Ishmael, yes, this generous interplay between oppositions, but that can lead to a kind of blindness itself that can sort of attenuate the ego, spread the ego out to where one quite literally becomes no one, not one person or another. And if you are not one person or another, would you write a novel like Moby-Dick? Maybe, maybe not. So the point is that the novel itself suggests two opposing ideas of doubling, both of which seem to have their virtues, both of which have their limitations. So where does that put us as readers?